Michael Muller. Thank you for joining us. He's the expert here, I would say, in value-sensitive design.
You're very kind, but I'm a student like everybody else in this.
Definitely, yeah. So that's the goal of this session, is that we all learn from each other, because I'm sure each one of us is working in totally different context. We've gone through totally different experience. We probably had different struggles working with different population. So it would be really useful if each of us can just reflect on what they did in their work, what questions you had or never found answer for them, what experiences you would like to share with others. To make the session more organized, I put 3 themes. I'll share my screen so you can see the 3 themes we will talk about. But by all means, feel free to add any points that it's not in those 3 themes. So let's see how we do the share here. Emily, can you help me here? I'm trying to share my screen, but it's...
there should be a button at the bottom that says share screen. Is that working?
Yeah.
I've made you a co-host, so you should be able to do that.
Share at a time. Okay.
If you just click the big, like, green one.
I think I got the privacy setting. That's what I always struggle with. I'll then just post in the chat the 3 themes and then go through them. I'll post the 3 themes in the chat. And this is just rough structure. Feel free to, like I said, to add any other points. So we have 3 themes. The first would be defining your research problem in a value-sensitive or culturally sensitive context. The second would be around the data collection methods, value eliciting methods, culturally sensitive tools, and data collection. And the third would be the point where you communicate your research after doing value-sensitive or culture-sensitive work, then taking it back to your design team. And we always talk about this gap between the researchers and the design team, because I'm assuming all of you are researchers here, maybe you're the designer. But if you're the one doing the research, there's always this point where we struggle to go back to the team and give them all the insights we got from the fields. And we know this is not something easy to communicate. But if you're focusing on value sensitive or culturally sensitive, this is very crucial point to think of: how do I transfer the knowledge I gained from the field to the rest of the design team? So we have these 3 points: problem definition, data collection, research communication. We'll give 15 minutes-ish to each point. We will start in that chronological order, but feel free to comment on any of them. So starting with the problem definition. Is anyone interested to share their experience about how they define the research problem in the first place, while taking the values or the culture of their participant into account? How do you define your research problem beyond the concept of gap spotting in the literature? I mean, this is usually the typical way we do it. We spot a gap in the literature and then we think, okay, this is the problem. But if you're concerned about your population values and culture, how would you make sure your problem is actually reflective of their world problems? And is anyone willing to share their experience, their thought, or even a question around this topic? Feel free to just start chat or raise your hand.
Yep, I can help contribute a little bit to that. So I'm Elizabeth Chesters. I've just, well, also hopefully just about to graduate from City, and I wanted my dissertation was a little bit in cross-cultural stuff as well, because that's something I'm really passionate about. But one of the topics that I got pushed back on from my supervisor was defining culture in the first place. So, for example, just not feeding into the stereotypes, but understanding where the differences are coming from, how to study that particular with a Western academia methodology, and then leading into what you just said of making sure that their problems are also not, are actually valid, and not just the ones that you're feeding into. I've also done research for volunteering for like refugees, which is like a whole other like cross-cultural spectrum of like got refugees from different cultures, but also the refugee culture and things like that. So really defining it was like quite a tricky one. So I see some notes, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, definitely agree. Anyone has a thought about how we define culture in the first place? Yeah, I think in our paper at least we talked about how we define culture in a national perspective, but definitely it depends on the population I think you're working with. You could be working with children at school, so that's their culture. It doesn't have to be a national thing. It could be colleagues at one workplace. So I think the way we define culture usually would also be from the ground up. You study the population you're talking to, and then you define culture within their perspective and what they think makes their culture, what kind of values or attitudes or behavior they share. So definitely defining culture in the first place. And within defining culture, did anyone find any struggles, any point want to raise? Yeah, please go, Michael.
Thank you. And I'm going to try not to be the old white guy who talks too much. This is not a direct personal problem, but more like a problem that I've encountered when writing with other people on a shared topic. And the problem is to figure out when we, and I'm going to speak for myself, this may also include some of the people, but not all of the people in this session, when we as Euro-Westerners approach a culture that's different from our own, and then how is it different? And crucially, which ones of our assumptions need to be looked at again? We had a big argument about this. My face was sort of flaming red for an hour afterwards. I possibly because I was embarrassed, I'm not sure. When we were trying to say, well, here's a good set of research ethics. And from my point of view as a person who has friends who are from indigenous nations in North America, the research ethics statements were extraordinarily individualist. And my friends are also, they're members of the majoritarian culture of the United States. Of course they are, how could they not be? But they also, in a way, members of their own cultures, which are much more about groups, much more about respect for elders, much more about understanding that knowledge comes from elders and is learned by observation. So very different from what I would do to find out something. I would talk to people, I'd ask questions, I'd try experiments. Not right for those cultures. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. And so, so when we begin to describe a culture that isn't our own, how do we develop the vocabulary? How do we check the way that we are describing that with the knowledge holders of that culture? That's enough out of me. But anyway, that was a challenge that I continue to have. And unfortunately, I continue to have it with other white people. So there we go.
Yeah. An interesting point on researcher reflexivity on themselves, their culture, their values, and how they might be having these assumptions about other culture and that might hinder the way by which they explore that culture. Anyone experience something similar?
If I may, I'm from India, and the definition of culture could mean a little bit different compared to Western culture. First, culture here could consist of a lot many definition itself. And culture here has to be looked from a religion and caste perspective as well. And in India, we have many states, and within in an area, the culture changes a lot. So, if I talk from my own research, from privacy research perspective, um, it is very difficult to define. So, we might be okay to share our password on WhatsApp, or share our medical reports on WhatsApp, but we might be very conscious. So, or how do we make? So I don't have the answer to that particular thing. How it is different, but so this is very different in terms of we. So yeah, I would stop here. And do not have that nuanced knowledge of the culture, but the culture has to be looked from a religion and caste perspective as well when we are talking in global south.
Right, so you're looking at a contextual approach to define culture. What
Yes.
makes a culture? And that's something is different from what Hofstede and the cultural models do. They come up with predefined values, and then they describe culture based on this set of values. But you're saying we should define culture within its own context, what makes the main values, let's say, as opposed to Hofstede approach, top down, or you're suggesting bottom up approach. That's very interesting, yes, and I've always agreed with that idea. I mean, we always see the value of Hofstede's work and other cultural models, but if you really want to explore culture, it's really important to go to that culture and see what the actual main values, if you well, to explore culture within them. So we define these main values from that context, not predefined. Um, so right, are we good on time now? Is it still? Yes. We still have time for problem definition. Anyone would like to add anything around how to define a problem? I can't see the
Yeah, sure.
yeah. Feel free to speak. I can't see the hands raised here.
I can't see that either, so I'm not sure
So you
how
could
to
go
do
to
that.
And go ahead.
gallery view if you guys want to do that. Gallery view will help each other to see on the top right.
Um, okay, it's on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Hmm. But yeah, feel free to go ahead.
I guess I guess I could share
Sorry,
also.
could I just share my bit first? I was just waiting for the Zoom thing.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, but can I share my point first? Sorry.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was waiting for the Zoom thing. But yeah, so the way I got around it with my dissertation is, I suppose, providing reasons to why to study the culture rather than just be like, okay, culture, how do they do it? So I looked at uncertainty avoidance, which is one of Gert Hofstadter's cultural dimensions, to understand how they find information. And I wanted it based on different countries as a definition of culture, but actually I actually switched it around to look at uncertainty avoidance of high and low and define those traits as the cultures, rather than other things which probably wouldn't have mattered so much or had that much impact on the results. So I suppose it's just thinking about how you can define the culture and what you're wanting to study. That's how I got around it. But sorry.
Fernando?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to also share, as a person coming from South America, you know, this was my first time coming to the United States, and I've been doing research with people here in the US. So I think that one of the advantages of, you know, coming to the country where you're going to be conducting research, and I think is that you are immersed, you know, in this society, and you know, in the process of being here, I have been learning a lot about, for example, what the values are, you know, in a Midwest context. You know, I'm living in the Midwest part of the United States, so that to me was very interesting to, while living here, be able to understand what what are the priorities, what is sort of like how people think or how people behave here. And then, I've been working with people living with stigmatized conditions in my particular type of research, in particular people living with HIV. So that again was another layer of, within this society that has certain, conceptions and perceptions about this condition. I think that for me also, it was important, apart from living here, to also find gatekeepers who would allow me to understand better these values from certain populations, and specifically this type of vulnerable, marginalized populations. I think that for me, it was very good to be a volunteer, for example, in these type of organizations, so I can understand the values and the type of language that they use and the type of things that matter to them. So I think that for me, the idea, the notion of culture, it is very contextual, and it depends on the type of people and the type of problems that they're facing, so that they can set their values, depending on that.
Right. Yeah. So you touched upon a point raised by Michael earlier about how to get to know a culture that's quite foreign from you as a researcher. So the point of gatekeepers, are they purely gatekeepers in terms of recruiting participants, or would you consider them as community researchers who would help translate or work directly with the participants?
Yeah, so for me, they have been like part of an advisory committee, if you will, because in particular, in this case, it's been a group of social workers, and they have support centers, and they have interaction with people every day that are living under these that are living with this condition. And so I think that for me, it's been working with them. I have also had the chance to also have contact with the people who I am doing research with. And so I think that with them acting as gatekeepers, I have been learning a lot of, like, for example, the type of language that I use when I am conducting research and when I'm working with people that does not further stigmatize their condition, right? Because I'm an outsider, I think that gatekeepers, they have helped me in understanding the type of approach that I should have when doing research with these people, because the ideas of respect, privacy, confidentiality are very important. And so I think that before jumping into working with certain populations, I think that there are other people out there who can give you a better idea or a better notion of this type of the values of the culture that surrounds this particular group of people. So yeah, for me, it's been key to have access to the gatekeepers, not only because of the objective of recruitment, but also of understanding the problematic better.
Yeah. Caro actually works in a similar context, right? Have you worked with the same approach, getting gatekeepers or community research?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm a postdoc on a research project called Intuit, and so with Abigail Durant and many others. But so yeah, we've been working in the HIV context, and so we had definitely gatekeepers, and in this kind of same role as working with two of organizations in the UK, one locally and one in London. They are HIV organization charity, and they've definitely played an amazing, like a very important role in getting access to those community. But we've also, so the particularity of the project, it's including a peer researcher on the project as part of the team. So she's working, and we're so lucky to be working with her. She's an amazing artist, also an activist, and she lives with the condition. So she's closely working with us. And I think you've raised very important points around language, and that's definitely something that we've been reworking on, and it's this ongoing work around a lot of things, but around language also. So we've had some. So my background is design, so my role is kind of organizing those hands-on workshops with people and to try, and language was something that in those first workshop we had, that we started to change the way we were talking and framing the research as a result of engaging people in a hands-on exploration around self-management, self-care, and sharing data with doctors. That was the wider context of the research. But I guess it's how do you keep having those ongoing questions throughout the project, not only at the start when you define the scope. I think it's the challenge is to have that ongoing questions and flexibility in changing those aspects. So yeah.
Right, interesting. Yeah, so to keep that angle throughout the research design process, it's not just in the beginning and then we're done. Let's go and design something. And I always had this question about community researchers and gatekeeper, which will move us to the second theme of our session with around data collection. So to understand other culture, you mentioned that you would use gatekeepers as community researchers and rely probably partially on them to do the recruiting and the probably questioning part. How do you make sure as a researcher that the gatekeepers, let's say, are not bringing their own bias or views, especially if they're insider from that culture? There's always the risk that they would recruit or they would choose people that they think representative or some ideal or some views. And we ourselves, as a researcher, we work hard on ourselves to try to avoid that. So having a gatekeeper makes it a double burden. So you want to work on yourself, and also you want to check that your gatekeepers are not bringing that much bias in the recruiting or framing of the research. Would anyone like to share their experience on that aspect?
Well, yeah, so I guess that in my case, so what has happened with, the gatekeepers here is that they have, provided feedback on the type of things that we want to do, the type of data collection, strategies that we're thinking of using, and just checking, the language, the type of things that we want to do are not offensive or, or something like that. But I think that ultimately in my case, I have had freedom to, use the type of things that are going to be addressing my research questions. And so it has not been that they have had a lot of say in the type of, an analysis or the type of instruments that I'm going to be using, but rather they're just trying to make sure that you are not going to, for example, offend or, put confidentiality or privacy at risk. But I think that, there is this sort of like reliance on when I'm trying to, for example, when I've recruited through them, is that they have their social networks, they have the social media venues, they have their own communication networks that I don't have access to. And so what they have done is like allowed to, for example, share, that I'm conducting a study through their networks. But it's been more, in my experience, it's been more like they just let it out on their social media venues, their social networks, and it's, whoever is interested. So I have not had that impression that they are selecting, the participants or controlling the recruitment process or controlling the research. They are just interested in sort of like making sure that it's safe, that it's going to be a safe space for them. So that's been my experience.
Social media is a good way to make sure the process is transparent and open for anyone to get in touch and participate.
Right.
Bernard, did you have a point to add?
Yeah, hi. So I've worked in some projects, where I've had to rely on gatekeepers. Similarly to what Fernando was mentioning about, learning about the community language, etc., how to speak, how to refer to things. When it came to the idea of the gatekeeper's biases, often what I found is, you know, people will sort of say, oh, I've got some really good people for you, or I have good participants for you to speak to, which I don't want to seem ungrateful, because they're doing, you know, they're trying to help me. But what I try to start off with is essentially a participant recruiting brief, the kind of person that I want to speak with. And then it's a lot of diplomatic language and diplomatically saying, that's great, thank you very much. You know, do you have people like this, or do you know people like this? And sometimes just, you know, serendipity of allowing some, if I can call it, you know, sort of randomly selected participants that gatekeeper may have suggested. It's happened. I think that the gatekeepers come with their own bias in, I want to say, more, it's probably not the right term, but more sort of hierarchical cultures, where there's more of a, let's say, sort of respect that needs to be given to that gatekeeper. So trying to be respectful and grateful, but not allowing their bias to, you know, override or point your research in a particular direction.
Interesting. So if they give you some participants or suggest some participant, you would use snowballing through that participant to get you to another. So you kind of get, can you do that?
Yes, the project I was working in particular, we had visited that country. We needed to, you know, carry out our research, so we were a little bit worried about snowballing. But I had a basic shape of a participant, if I can put it like that, and I would then try and use that as a recruitment brief for that gatekeeper. Sometimes, you know, people would turn up that they weren't like that person, so maybe I had a slightly shorter research session with that person. It was still interesting, but it wasn't, you know, exactly what I was looking for.
Right. Anupriya, did you have a point?
Yeah. Hi. So I work on menstrual health in India, and I have worked on mental health also. So working on these two different topics, I had different gatekeepers. When I was working with mental health, we worked with the top-notch medical institute in India, and they follow hierarchies like anything. So you can't afford to break the hierarchies there. Whereas when I am currently working on menstrual health, there is very limited NGOs and individuals who are taking initiatives and spreading the word about menstrual health and menstrual health awareness. So from both the experience, what I have learned is, you know, you can't rely on only one gatekeeper, even to understand the language, or if you want to eliminate the bias, because even the bias which those gatekeeper have developed over the years is because of the kind of people they are interacting with and the culture of that particular geographical space, right? And in India, it changes very rapidly when you move from one state to another, or even one location to another within a state. So for menstrual health, what we are currently doing is we work with three different NGOs who work on different aspects of menstruation, which brings in a very diverse perspective of it. And then what we do is, like, thankfully, due to these NGOs, we have found a way and connection where we go and participate in national level, policy level discussions, which further opens the gate. And there we are able to meet other small NGOs who are working in different states. So having conversations with them, reading their research, the kind of language they are using, they are very contrasting. You know, some people you have a very positive view of menstruation in their state, and some people have a very negative connotation. So if I'm switching from state to state, I have to be very careful that, you know, I'm not hurting their sentiments, because they are not going to talk to me after that. So that is something which I have learned, that it depends upon the nature of the subject, how it is treated. So if you have that luxury that you can engage with multiple gatekeepers, be it NGOs, be it professionals, be it schools. Like in my case, you engage with them, and then you gather that knowledge, and then you get accustomed to that, and then fine tune yourself when you're approaching that particular set of population in that particular region. We can't depend on just one gatekeeper and ensure that they won't be biased. They will be biased, right? We have to accept that. That's part of qualitative study. But how we can try and eliminate it to the best of our abilities is the question.
Yeah, a really good point. Thanks. So multiple gatekeepers, it helps to bring in diversity of views, and so you can manage at least to probably spot some biases here and there, and then try to represent everyone all together. And Michael?
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I should know how to use a microphone. Thank you for calling on me. I was thinking everybody's biased all the time. I'm biased, you're biased. And so do you know the work of Sandra Harding on standpoint epistemologies? I know that was, I don't mean to be putting anybody on the spot.
Shall you post it in the chat for everyone?
I will. I promise I will. Thank you. Just as soon as I finish babbling. Harding says it's a variation on the famous Donna Haraway criticism of the view from nowhere. Nobody views something from nowhere. We all view our data from someplace, and that would be true of informants as well. And Harding says, if we disclose our perspective, if we disclose our standpoint, then we begin to approach objectivity, because the reader can evaluate what we are saying from our standpoint, and that's a more honest way to do research. I'm persuaded of this. I'm not saying everybody should be, but that's another way of approaching the topic of biased informants. Of course, they're biased, they're human. How do we work with that? How do we turn that into not a problem, but a beautiful, rich advantage? I'll stop babbling and start typing.
All right, thank you very much. So the idea of, again, disclosing yourself as a researcher, and actually in the social science, many scientists recommend the idea of doing a monologue or writing your own autobiography if you're doing qualitative research, because they believe you can't really understand people if you can't understand yourself, if that makes sense. So going deep on who you are, what your values are, understanding yourself before going to the field and trying to represent other people's values or concepts. Very good point. Thank you, Michael. And in the same domain here, we're still in the same theme, I guess. We can have one more point maybe around data collection. So the idea of collecting data or being in the field, communicating with your participants while taking their cultural background. And that's what our paper was about. How do you use culturally sensitive tool or communication approach to talk to people? How do you make sure that you're not just sitting there or interviewing them with a predefined set of questions, not necessarily tailored to their the way they communicate or their culture barriers in terms of communication? Has anyone worked around culturally sensitive communication with participants, or have any struggles?
So again, I would like to add, not specifically, but yes, so menstruation is a conversational taboo. People don't use the word menstruation. They have their own colloquial words for that. Just one example I would give is, like, they don't even call sanitary products as sanitary products. They'll call it things. So as a researcher, when I am having a conversation with these women, and when I say women, like, my participants are mostly female who menstruate and identify as women. So they are from different cultural backgrounds, from different states, who are living in Delhi right now for they're studying or they're doing jobs. But then I have to be really careful to understand from where they are coming from, the kind of language they are used to. It, I can't just walk up and say, do you use tampons, or this is vagina and this is reproductive organ. They will never be comfortable. So I have faced a lot of struggles having that normal conversation, even just to initiate a conversation, so I don't offend them, or I don't just, you know, piss them off and they just walk away. And at the same time, they have very stern and firm cultural beliefs associated with menstruation, which might not align with the advocacy I'm trying to do with my research. So you know, navigating that balance and ensuring that I'm not bringing in my bias is one biggest challenge which I am facing. And same goes when I was thinking of using sanitary products as cultural probes, or probes for having interaction. That was also another challenge which I was thinking I might face, because people in India do not use tampons or menstrual cup. They are the alien concept to them. And even if you show them, they'll get scared of, okay, this is something you have to insert inside your body, a hymen will get ruptured, how dare you show us this, and this is against our tradition and stuff like that. So that is also another challenge, which so how to have that balance when you're collecting data, at the same time you're trying to advocate, you know, these are the right practices. Because the kind of research I'm doing, it leaves a lasting impact on the participant after having that conversation. So I ensure that, you know, at the end of the session, the participants learn at least one new thing, like how to manage their menstruation or something new. But at the same time, I have to respect their strict, rigid cultural thoughts and beliefs. So that's a huge challenge I face when I'm doing research on this particular topic.
So working on a taboo topic, and have you used any specific tools to facilitate the conversations? Something tangible?
Yes. So in the recent study, which was published in CHI 2020, we used very basic tools. We used wooden blocks, we used white papers, post-its. So it was more around, you know, how do you manage your periods while you are traveling in Delhi or using Delhi Metro or public transport. So we asked them to create a safe space using the blocks and the parameters, and we use chessboard pieces to show, you know, if there is majority of menstruating gender around you, how will your safe space look, and if there are more of non-menstruating gender around you, how will it get affected and impacted. So what we realized, previous to that, we were using traditional methods like interviewing and online surveys, because people were not comfortable talking to us on the subject. But what we realized, when we gave them this tangible artifacts and brought them into a space, there were a lot of non-verbal cues and a lot of themes which we were missing out when we were just going with the traditional approach. But at the same time, there were certain interviews where I could see from the expression of the participant that they are not comfortable. When I used to put, you know, a lot of black chessboard pieces in their safe space and ask them, you know, how would it change? So they would just cringe and shy away, and they would like, you know, why you are asking us, like we don't, then it's no more of a safe space for us and stuff like that. So that is a little bit of challenge to ensure that they are comfortable, and tangibility and stuff like that does bring in an edge, but again, then it's a challenge also at the same time.
Yes, thank you very much. Could you post the paper on
Sure.
the site so everyone can have access to it?
Sure, I'll just do that.
Shall we move to the final theme, which is how you communicate your research, culturally sensitive, value sensitive research, to usually would be a diverse team of designers. So what kind of challenges or what kind of approaches you would use in that communication process within your team? Does anyone have any thought on that? Anyone? Fernando?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I was just thinking back at the idea of this self-disclosure or self-disclaimer or ethical considerations that probably you need to mention, or your standpoint, sorry, which is what Michael was talking about, that the researcher has or the researcher team has about controversial topic. You know, because I'm working on HIV, I have to, I think, have a standpoint, because I believe that there is a social injustice, you know, towards this population. So I think that when I am, you know, writing my insights or communicating results from a study, I think that I want to also advocate. And when there's advocacy piece comes into place, I think that it's important to probably in the methods section mention, I mean, who are you? You know, for this population, where are you coming from? What is your idea? What do you think is happening here? So I think that, you know, when I'm trying to, talk about insights, I want to also advocate. So that's at least for, in my case, one way of communicating, you know, the results of my research. But then again, I let people know that that is my position, that's my.
So you think there's power in presenting yourself to the design team, not only as a researcher, and here I am communicating research, you're presenting yourself as the advocate of this work, and that passion may, or hopefully, transfer to the team so they feel we're advocating something here. We're not just designing. That's
Correct.
a great thing. Pranjal, did you have a point?
No, not yet.
Okay, I probably saw something. Yes, anyone has any thought about communication within your design team?
Yeah, I mean, I see the same problems with regular users as well. When everyone just sits there, it's like, oh, I've seen that one user, so therefore everybody else behaves the same way. I think having workshops to get all the assumptions out of the way. So I've done workshops with like UX for Change, where it's like just listing your assumptions, but also inviting people along to the research, so it's less like Chinese whispers, and there's less room to shy away from users and their actual stories and how they're showing it, but also communicating their stress and emotion, like in a usability test in the first place or in an interview, will help translate their story that way. And then having people's assumptions challenged face to face is a lot more powerful with that. And if that's not realistic, something like using videos, I absolutely love quotes. I sprinkle them everywhere because it feels like less Chinese whispers between the two.
Chinese whisper, interesting. Caro, did you have a thought about this?
Yeah, I guess we've been using different ways of analyzing data or insights from our research, and one of it was relying on some more creative methods, such as poetic inquiry, and that made sense in our context because we've been working. So in our team, there is like it's a multiple expertise, but one of us is a poet, as I said, and I'm a more visual designer or person, so I've been responding visually to the data, and she's been crafting poems, but those we've been doing it together, so I've been learning a lot from her. And when we were going through the transcript of our session with participants, we've made an effort of annotating our emotions also, and thoughts or personal reflection throughout that process, and it was very much iterative, and that prompted a lot of it was quite a long process, and I guess that really helped to kind of help us to emerge, facilitated the emergence of our deeper feelings and how we felt, and in relation to also our well-being maybe, or emotional state when we some of the story were quite strong, so that really helped with that on that side of things. But it's also helped with collaboration, so creative methods really help to kind of engage everyone in the team, and so I don't know.
It's a great point. Everyone in the team would be using their own way of understanding them with their words and poems or visual. So everyone gets them together and expressed differently. Anu, do you have a point to?
So I was just sharing my experience that, by including positionality or self-disclosure in our papers, it has helped readers. How I can say that, in the very first paper which we submitted, so we didn't include the positionality, and we got a feedback from the reviewers that, what is your position on this? Why this kind of work? So that when we wrote the positionality in the revised version, and we understood, we need to make clear that, I, like 4 of our authors, all of them are from Indian origin, and all of them are born and brought up in India, though 2 of them were settled abroad right now, but we have faced the same struggles the same marginalization, the same stigma around the topic. So we need to bring that, you know, it is our own experiences over these years which has shaped this motivation behind this work, and why we feel that, you know, it should be dealt in this particular manner. How so our own experiences has defined the way we are interpreting our data, because there are subtle nuances which users or our participants are not sharing, but we can read between the lines because we have been through the same experiences. We know where they're coming from and what they mean. So that always adds a value to the reader to relate with how you have interpreted data, and that adds a lot of value to your work. So that's just what I wanted to share.
Thanks. So self-disclosure seemed like an essential theme in all phases of the research design process. And with that, we could wrap up our session for today. Would anyone would like to share any point about any of the themes or general point? Feel free to add anything. Anyone? Michael, maybe? Anyone?
Thanks for the invitation. No, I'm happy.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from today, actually. I've taken a lot of notes, and thank you everyone for all the points you added. We talked about self-disclosure, reflexivity, defining culture within a contextual approach, looking at what researchers are targeting from doing the research itself. So that could help define culture, layers. Some of you mentioned layers of cultures, subcultures, trying to understand culture within that multiplicity of definitions. We talked about gatekeepers, how to avoid bias and going wide, multiple gatekeepers to help eliminate the bias. And the advocacy point, we mentioned how, yeah, your role as a researcher to be an advocate, that could help also your design team. And Chinese whisper, I like that concept. You try how much you could try to avoid the Chinese whisper effect on your the way you communicate research to designers. These are roughly all the points we touched upon. Thank you, everyone. If you would like to post your email here, or for anyone to get in touch, I'll do definitely the same. If you have a paper you think is relevant to what we discussed today, please post the title and the link for the paper so everyone can have a look at it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, and especially the organizers for doing all the work to bring us together. Take care.
I'll keep a copy of the chat for you, and I'll send those emails across as well. So if you want to get in touch with each other as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Amazing. Thanks.
What am I doing? That was really good, I think. Oh, you're still muted. You're muted. There you go.
I muted myself. Thank you very much. All the help on Teams was really
Yeah, was that all right? I was kind of like, I hope I'm not bombarding you.
No, it was really good, actually, because it's really hard to listen to what people say and taking notes and trying to see who raised their hands or asked questions. Was very good. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yeah, I hope you got something out of it. It seemed like a very good discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Take
So
care.
I'll send you some stuff about. Bye.